April 24th, 1915. Just after dawn. A thin mist hangs over the shattered fields north of Ypres, drifting between broken farmhouses and the splintered remains of trees burned by chlorine gas the day before. Canadian soldiers steady their breath in shallow trenches cut from wet Belgian soil, gripping rifles many already mistrust. The long, polished Ross rifle, clean on parade grounds, temperamental in real combat, sits heavy in their hands. Its bolt sticks, its magazine catches. Mud clings to the chamber like glue. But there is no time to question it now. Across the open ground, German troops form into columns behind a creeping haze, confident these inexperienced Canadians will fold. They know the Ross rifle's reputation. They expect jams, panic, collapse. Instead, they hear something else. A sudden crack of unexpected accuracy, then another, then a line of Canadians rising through the smoke, refusing to yield even as their outdated rifles fight against them. It is here, in this ruined corner of Belgium, that a weapon's failure and a nation's resolve begin to collide, setting the stage for one of the most shocking battlefield reversals Germany would witness. When the First World War erupted in August 1914, Canada entered the conflict with the enthusiasm of a young nation eager to prove itself on the world stage. Still tied politically to Britain, yet proud of its growing identity, Canada raised a massive volunteer force in just a few weeks. Over 33,000 men sailed across the Atlantic that autumn, forming what would become the 1st Canadian Division, a unit trained, equipped and determined to stand beside the British Expeditionary Force in France and Belgium. But from the moment these volunteers began drilling at Valcartier Camp in Quebec, one problem followed them relentlessly: the rifle they were issued. The Ross rifle Mark III, a long, beautifully machined Canadian-made weapon, represented national pride more than battlefield practicality. Its designer, Sir Charles Ross, promised unmatched precision, and on the rifle range, that promise held true. The Ross could deliver astonishing accuracy at long distances, rivaling some of the finest European rifles of its day. Canadian snipers would later prove this repeatedly. Yet war seldom offers the comfort of clean shooting berms and polished barrels. Still, political forces kept the rifle in Canadian hands. Prime Minister Robert Borden's government had invested deeply in showcasing Canadian industry. Replacing the Ross meant admitting a national failure, something few officials were willing to do during wartime. Reports from officers who complained were softened, delayed or dismissed. Official trials emphasized the rifle's strengths and minimized its flaws, and so the 1st Canadian Division carried the Ross across the Atlantic in 1915, stepping into a war that no government, no military planner, and no rifle designer fully understood yet. Their destination was the ancient city of Ypres, Belgium, a strategic bulge in the Allied line that the Germans were determined to crush. The fields surrounding the town had already become a graveyard of shattered battalions. The British, exhausted after months of grinding warfare, needed fresh troops to reinforce the line. The Canadians arrived unaware of the storm waiting for them. Nothing in their training prepared them for industrial warfare. Trenches filled with standing water. Bodies of fallen French and British soldiers lay frozen in the parapets. Rats moved in waves. Artillery shells fell with no warning, turning earth and men into indistinguishable fragments. And still, the Ross rifle followed them everywhere. Many soldiers cleaned it constantly. Others filed parts to make it chamber British rounds more reliably. Some carried tools in their pockets to free jammed bolts quicker. A few quietly picked up discarded Lee Enfields from British trenches, recognizing the weapon they desperately needed but were not issued. Yet the majority held on to the Ross because they had no choice, and because discipline demanded it. By April, whispers spread among the men. If the Germans attack hard, this rifle may kill us before they do. But discipline held, and morale remained steady. The Canadians' reputation for rugged determination was already forming. British commanders praised their spirit. German intelligence assessed them as inexperienced but enthusiastic. Colonial troops armed with an inferior rifle, as one German officer recorded. What neither side fully understood yet was how far determination could carry a unit whose equipment did not deserve them. That realization would come soon, because Germany was preparing something the world had not seen for centuries, a weapon that would change warfare forever. And the Canadians, burdened with a rifle that jammed in the mud, were standing directly in its path. This tension, outdated equipment facing modern terror, now leads us into the second phase of the context section, where German strategy and battlefield conditions reshaped the entire meaning of the Ross rifle. By early April 1915, German High Command believed they held a decisive advantage at Ypres. Their intelligence suggested the Allied defences in the sector were thin, fragmented and exhausted. The French 45th Algerian Division, positioned north of the Canadians, was worn down by months of fighting. British forces to the south were stretched to their limits, and in between, forming the hinge of the line, stood the 1st Canadian Division, still fresh but armed with what Germans regarded as an obsolete, unreliable rifle. German units respected the accuracy of the Gewehr 98 Mauser, a rugged, battle-hardened rifle designed to survive mud, rain and rapid fire. In field reports, German officers openly mocked the Ross rifle's reputation for jamming under pressure. They expected that any sustained attack would cause chaos among the Canadians. They believed technological superiority, not just manpower, would break the line. What they did not expect was resistance that bordered on the impossible. Before the attack, the German army deployed something the world had not seen on a European battlefield since ancient times: chlorine gas. Stored in thousands of steel cylinders along the front, the poisonous cloud was released into the wind on the evening of the 22nd of April 1915. A dense yellow-green fog rolled across no man's land, sinking into trenches where French colonial troops stood guard. Within minutes, men were choking, collapsing, clawing at their throats as the gas destroyed their lungs. A 4-mile section of the Allied line dissolved almost instantly. German soldiers advanced behind the cloud, fully expecting to march straight through the gap. But the gas drifted toward the Canadians as well. They had no issued gas masks, no protective gear, only improvised cloths soaked in water or urine, crude but often life-saving. As the gas seeped into their sector, Canadian soldiers braced for impact, coughing violently but holding their trenches. Some fired blindly through the haze, others waited, trying to distinguish friend from enemy. In this chaos, the weaknesses of the Ross rifle became painfully clear. The tight action and long bolt were never meant for mud-caked trenches or rapid fire under suffocating gas. Ammunition fouled quickly, chambers clogged, extractors snapped. Rifles that functioned perfectly on Canadian parade grounds now fought their owners with every shot. Some men rammed boots against the bolt to force it open. Others dropped their rifles entirely, grabbing Lee Enfields from fallen British soldiers. Yet even with malfunctioning weapons, the Canadians refused to retreat. German shock began here, not from the rifles, but from the men behind them. Trench by trench, the remaining French units collapsed and fell back, leaving the Canadian flank dangerously exposed. A 4-mile gap now yawned in the Allied line. If the Germans broke through, Ypres would fall, and the entire British position in Belgium could unravel. Canadian commanders understood instantly. If they did not hold, the line would shatter. They launched desperate counterattacks through artillery fire, smoke and gas. Small units charged forward to buy minutes, then hours, then crucial ground. Many carried Ross rifles that jammed after 1 or 2 shots, forcing them into close combat. Others found stable firing positions where, protected from mud and gas, the Ross's exceptional accuracy turned it into a precision weapon that stunned German observers. It was the first time the Germans realized that even defective equipment could not measure a soldier's willpower. Canadian snipers, using the Ross's unmatched long-range accuracy, struck German officers, machine gun nests, and advancing formations with precision that left German units momentarily confused. The colonials shoot well, one German diary noted, a grudging acknowledgement that contradicted their earlier assumptions. But the larger truth was darker. The Canadians were fighting a modern industrial army with a rifle already outdated by the war's evolving brutality. The Ross was never designed for mud-clogged trenches, frantic firefights, or bayonet charges launched in desperation to seal a collapsing flank. The battlefield of Ypres revealed every flaw and every unexpected strength at the same time. This clash of expectation and reality leads us into the next part of the documentary. The angles, the human, tactical, technological, and psychological dimensions of how Canadians turned a failing rifle into a symbol of resilience. For the ordinary Canadian infantryman, the Ross rifle was more than a piece of equipment. It was a burden they carried between duty and frustration. In letters home, soldiers described it as beautiful but treacherous. They admired its accuracy, yet feared its stubbornness. During the first days at Ypres, men learned quickly that survival depended not only on courage but on mechanical skill. They scraped mud from chambers with knives, hammered bolts against trench walls, and disassembled rifles under fire just to keep them operational. What stands out most is not the weapon's flaws, but the remarkable composure Canadians maintained despite them. Even as gas drifted in and German artillery smashed their forward trenches, soldiers rationed every working shot. When the rifle jammed, they cleared it. When clearing failed, they fought with whatever remained: grenades, bayonets, even borrowed British rifles. Their ability to adapt under pressure formed the backbone of the defence. German units, trained to exploit technical weakness, were stunned to see men fighting so fiercely with weapons that should have failed them completely. This human resilience, quiet, methodical, unbreakable, became the defining feature of Canada's stand at Ypres, and it set the emotional tone for everything that followed. Although the Ross rifle struggled in field conditions, the terrain around Ypres offered unexpected tactical opportunities. The broken landscape of farms, irrigation ditches, and dense hedgerows created natural firing positions where soldiers could brace the long rifle securely. In static engagements, when the rifle was kept clean and fired deliberately, its precision allowed Canadians to suppress German advances at longer ranges than anticipated. Canadian officers quickly recognized this and adjusted tactics accordingly. Instead of relying on rapid-fire volleys, where the Ross often failed, they emphasized controlled shots from fortified positions. Platoons rotated cleaning duties during lulls in combat. Small fire teams were reorganized so at least one man carried a more reliable weapon, usually a salvaged Lee Enfield, while the Ross users positioned themselves where accuracy mattered more than rate of fire. These adaptations meant that the Ross, despite its shortcomings, could still contribute meaningfully to the defence. German officers later remarked that Canadian fire seemed unusually steady, not realizing how much effort it took to maintain that illusion. The terrain did not fix the rifle, but it gave Canadian troops just enough space, cover, and stability to turn a flawed weapon into something capable of holding a critical line. This interplay between environment and ingenuity would play an even greater role as the fighting intensified. From the German perspective, the Canadians arrived in Europe as complete unknowns. Intelligence reports labelled them enthusiastic but inexperienced, colonial volunteers armed with a substandard rifle that would collapse under battlefield stress. When the first Ross rifles jammed early in the engagement, German soldiers believed their assumptions were confirmed. Yet what followed contradicted every expectation. Across the front, German units advancing behind the gas cloud encountered pockets of resistance far stronger than anticipated. Canadian rifle fire remained unexpectedly precise at medium and long ranges. Officers were struck down by accurate shots from positions they believed suppressed. Machine gun teams attempting to set up fire lanes found themselves targeted before they could deploy properly. German diaries and letters revealed genuine surprise. Some noted that Canadians held too long for green troops. Others lamented that The colonial rifle, though poorly made, killed well in skilled hands. The shock was not merely tactical, it was psychological. The Germans expected a fragile line. Instead, they found a stubborn force that fought with a mixture of desperation and discipline. This surprise would soon evolve into respect, a sentiment that deepened as the Canadians continued to resist under impossible conditions. With these first three angles established, we now move deeper into the technological, leadership, and moral dimensions of the battle. The Ross rifle's story contains one of the great ironies of early modern warfare. The same weapon that jammed in rapid infantry combat became one of the most accurate sniper rifles of the entire war. Its long barrel, tight tolerances, and high muzzle velocity, the very features that made it unreliable in muddy trenches, gave it extraordinary precision when used from stable positions. Canadian snipers quickly recognized this advantage. While frontline troops cursed the rifle for its stubborn bolt, marksmen embraced it as a tool capable of reaching out across no man's land with deadly accuracy. At Ypres, the German army experienced this firsthand. Sniper teams using Ross rifles struck officers at ranges the Mauser 98 struggled to match. Observation posts, machine gun nests, and artillery spotters found themselves targeted with unsettling precision. German reports from this period mention unexpectedly accurate colonial fire, not realizing that the rifle they considered inferior could outperform their own in specialized roles. This technological paradox created a unique dynamic. The rifle that endangered Canadian infantry also empowered their snipers. It symbolized the duality of Canadian participation in early World War I, a force hampered by political decisions, yet capable of remarkable ingenuity when allowed to exploit technical strengths. This contradiction soon fed directly into the pressure on the Canadian line as the battle intensified. While Canadian soldiers struggled with their Ross rifles in the trenches, their officers fought a parallel battle behind the lines. Reports about the rifle's failures had circulated long before Ypres, but wartime bureaucracy and political pressure slowed every attempt at reform. Officers in the 1st Canadian Division, from company commanders to battalion leaders, faced an uncomfortable truth. Their men were going into battle with a rifle many doubted. Rather than complain, frontline leadership adopted a culture of adaptation. They ordered more cleaning breaks. They trained soldiers to swap parts rapidly. They encouraged the discreet use of Lee Enfields whenever they appeared on the battlefield. And when gas hit the sector, creating conditions that would cripple any precision weapon, officers focused on keeping formations cohesive, relying on discipline instead of firepower. Their greatest contribution, however, was psychological. Soldiers took cues from the calm, steady demeanor of their leaders. Officers downplayed the rifle's failures and emphasized its accuracy, reminding troops that deliberate shooting could still hold the line. German units later noted that Canadian counterattacks were remarkably organized for troops under new command, not realizing how much effort Canadian officers put into holding together a division fighting with compromised tools. These leadership decisions carried the Canadians through the darkest hours of Ypres, straight toward the moment when the rifle's fate would be sealed forever. Beyond tactics and leadership, the battle revealed something deeper, a psychological resilience that Germany had not anticipated. The Ross rifle became a symbol of everything the Canadians were up against: unstable supply chains, political decisions from Ottawa, and the brutal learning curve of a young nation facing industrial warfare for the first time. Yet the men refused to let their equipment define their performance. Some soldiers described the Ross as betraying them at critical moments. Others called it a test. What mattered most was the unity formed in adversity. Companies fought not because they trusted their rifles, but because they trusted one another. When the rifle failed, the soldier did not. That distinction left an impression on the Germans, who expected technical superiority to break the Canadians quickly. Instead, the opposite happened. German units found themselves facing troops who fought past the limits of their weapons. who held the line through endurance rather than firepower. This stubborn resistance, born from duty, pride and sheer refusal to yield, reshaped German views of Canadian capabilities. It also laid the emotional groundwork for the decisive moment of the battle. All these angles now converge in the critical hours at Ypres, when the outdated rifle, the collapsing line, and the weight of German pressure collide in a single turning point. By the night of April 23, 1915, the 1st Canadian Division stood on the edge of collapse. The chlorine gas attack had torn open a gap that should have doomed the entire Allied position. French units had been shattered, British reserves were thin, and German troops were moving with a confidence born from technological superiority and overwhelming momentum. Everything now depended on the Canadians, exhausted, coughing from gas exposure, and fighting with rifles that jammed under the slightest pressure. As dawn broke on April 24th, German artillery opened a bombardment unlike anything the Canadians had yet endured. Shells fell in continuous waves, shredding earth, timber, men, and weapons. Trenches collapsed inward. Barbed wire flew into the air like broken springs. Gas residue clung to the ground, making every breath heavy and painful. Yet the German infantry advancing behind the barrage expected resistance to finally crumble. At several points along the line, it nearly did. Sections of Canadian trenches were so clogged with mud that Ross rifles failed after 2 or 3 rounds. Soldiers cleared bolts with knives, boot heels, or bare hands rubbed raw from repeated attempts. In some forward positions, rifles locked entirely, leaving men with no choice but to mount the parapet and meet German attackers in close combat. Bayonets flashed in the smoke. Grenades detonated at arm's length. Bodies collided in desperate bursts of violence as the Canadians fought to prevent a breakthrough that would unravel the entire front. German troops later described the shock of what they encountered. They fought like veterans, one report read. Even when their rifles did not fire, they continued to hold. The Canadians' determination forced German units to slow, then stall. But the pressure kept building. The enemy repeatedly probed the exposed left flank, where French units had been wiped away. Every gap had to be sealed with hastily assembled firing lines, improvised barricades, or all-out bayonet charges. Canadian officers shouted orders over artillery blasts, repositioning units on the run, struggling to hold cohesion as casualties mounted. In these moments, the Ross rifle became both a liability and, in rare cases, a salvation. On higher ground or in stable firing positions, its accuracy stalled German advances with single, deliberate shots. But in the muddy lowlands, where the heaviest fighting took place, it faltered catastrophically. Extractors snapped. Bolts jammed permanently. Soldiers cursed as they fought the rifle more fiercely than the enemy. Still, they endured. The decisive moment of Part 1 came mid-morning, when a large German force attempted to sweep through the northern edge of the Canadian sector, hoping to exploit the widening gap. The Canadian response was immediate and astonishing. An all-out counterattack by mixed companies, some carrying Ross rifles, others clutching Lee Enfields taken from the dead, many with little more than bayonets and grenades. They surged forward across terrain still shaking from artillery fire. Smoke curled around them. Mud clung to their uniforms. But the counterattack worked. German units, expecting retreat, instead faced a sudden wave of disciplined aggression. Several German officers were struck down by long-range fire from Ross-equipped marksmen, halting the attack's coordination and buying the Canadians precious ground. By noon, both sides understood the truth. The Canadians should have broken hours earlier, but they hadn't. And if they were still fighting now, they were capable of fighting longer. Yet beneath this defiant stand lay a growing crisis. The rifle itself was failing faster than men could fix it. Rifles jammed, cracked, or became unusable entirely. Ammunition supplies were dwindling. The Canadians could not sustain this forever. The stage was set for the final turning point, the moment when the Canadian High Command would be forced to confront what every soldier already knew. The Ross rifle could no longer stay in the war. By the afternoon of April 24th, 1915, the Canadian line at Ypres was holding by the thinnest imaginable margin. But beneath the smoke and chaos, a quieter truth was becoming impossible to escape. Canadian soldiers were running out of functional rifles. Company quartermasters reported stacks of broken Ross rifles piling up like scrap metal. Some had bolts jammed immovably into swollen chambers. Others had bent extractors sheared clean off. A few had been so hopelessly clogged with mud that soldiers discarded them mid-fight, choosing the certainty of a bayonet over the frustration of a weapon that refused to fire. Messages flowed up the chain of command. Rifles unserviceable, large numbers failing, men requesting Lee Enfields. Officers had known about the rifle's flaws for months, but this was the first time the failures threatened the integrity of the entire line. As German pressure intensified, Canadian soldiers began doing what discipline technically forbade. They scavenged. Any British Lee Enfield they found, dropped, damaged, or left beside a fallen ally, they seized instantly. The difference was immediate. The Lee Enfield 303 fired reliably, extracted spent brass under filth and stress, and cycled faster than the Ross could even dream of. Soldiers who had struggled all morning suddenly felt the relief of a rifle that obeyed them. Frontline commanders understood the significance of this shift. They watched men swap rifles in the middle of combat, sometimes discarding the Ross altogether. This was no longer a matter of preference. It was survival. The turning point came when officers issued unofficial but unmistakable orders. Use whatever rifle works. It was a quiet rebellion executed under fire, and German forces noticed it. Reports from German battalions described a change in the Canadian fire. What had been intermittent, jam-punctuated volleys became steadier, faster and more controlled. The enemy believed reinforcements had arrived. They did not realize the truth. Canadians had simply taken the rifles they needed. By evening, the Canadian division had accomplished the unthinkable. They had prevented a major German breakthrough. But they had paid a devastating price, and the weapon meant to symbolize Canadian industrial pride lay shattered across the battlefield. When British officers surveyed the positions after the worst fighting subsided, they found scenes that left lasting impressions. Piles of jammed rifles stacked in trenches, Canadians cleaning Lee Enfields taken from the dead, snipers still clinging to the Ross because its accuracy remained unmatched at long range. One British major recorded in his diary, "They held the line with rifles that failed them, and still they held it." But the emotional moment of decision came in the Canadian leadership meeting that followed. Senior officers, exhausted and shaken by casualties, finally put into words what their soldiers had lived through. The Ross rifle was no longer acceptable for frontline service. It was not an official order yet. That would come months later. But this was the instant the rifle died as an infantry weapon. The war had exposed its weaknesses brutally and publicly. No amount of national pride could save it now. German assessments completed after the battle told an unexpected story. They recorded that the Canadians fought with unusual steadiness, excellent marksmanship, and a discipline beyond expectation. They never understood how many Canadians had fought with a rifle they did not trust. The line at Ypres held, but the price of holding it forced Canada to confront a difficult truth. Bravery and endurance can win a battle, but they cannot compensate for a weapon unfit for the demands of modern war. The collapse of faith in the Ross now set the stage for the next phase, the political and military consequences that would reshape Canadian armament policy for the rest of the conflict. When the guns finally quieted around Ypres, the battlefield told a story no report could soften. Broken Ross rifles lay scattered across trenches, ditches, and ruined farmhouses, twisted metal reminders of a political gamble that had cost lives. The Canadians had held the line, astonishing both Allied and German commanders. But the cost of perseverance revealed a truth impossible to ignore. Within days, senior officers in the Canadian division began sending formal memoranda up the chain of command, detailing the catastrophic failures of the Ross in combat. Their words carried unusual weight. These were not theoretical objections from training ranges or peacetime trials. They were battlefield assessments written by men who had watched rifles jam as enemy soldiers closed the distance. Brigadier General Richard Turner and Lieutenant Colonel Louis Lipsett were among those who spoke bluntly. They described rifles rendered useless after a handful of shots, extractors snapping under minimal stress, and units forced into desperate close combat because their weapons simply stopped functioning. Their evaluations left little room for political interpretation. The rifle endangered the force it was supposed to equip. In Ottawa, however, the response was cautious. The Ross rifle had been a national project, championed as proof that Canada could arm itself without relying entirely on British industry. Abandoning it meant admitting that pride had overshadowed practicality. Prime Minister Robert Borden and his advisers hesitated, reluctant to concede failure so publicly, especially in wartime. Yet the evidence could not be contained. British officers, examining the battlefield after Ypres, supported the Canadians' claims. They noted piles of discarded rifles and units heavily depleted, not solely from enemy fire, but from avoidable mechanical failures. British General Sir Horace Smith-Dorrien added his voice, warning that keeping the Ross in frontline service risked repetition of the same disaster. Still, official change moved slowly. The Canadians at the front did not wait. Through unofficial channels, entire battalions began replacing Ross rifles with Lee Enfields. Quartermasters quietly traded weapons with British units. Officers encouraged the shift, knowing that discipline and courage could not compensate for a rifle that faltered before the enemy did. By the summer of 1915, the Canadian High Command could no longer deny what every soldier already knew. Internal investigations confirmed what the Ypres battlefield had made undeniable. The Ross rifle was unsuitable for trench warfare. Mud, rapid fire, and incompatible ammunition, all hallmarks of the Western Front, turned the precision-made rifle into a liability. Finally, in June 1916, after more battles, more failures, and more urgent reports, the Canadian government officially withdrew the Ross from infantry service. The Lee Enfield became the standard rifle for all Canadian troops in France. But while the political machinery turned slowly, the soldiers understood the truth instantly. The Canadians had endured one of the war's most terrifying assaults armed with a weapon that should have doomed them. Yet they held their line, fought through gas, mud, and rifle jams, and earned respect from allies and enemies alike. Now, as we move into the second part of the aftermath, the focus shifts from military decisions to human memory, how the soldiers who carried the Ross remembered it, and how its legacy shaped Canada's identity in the years that followed. For the men who survived Ypres, the Ross rifle became a symbol as complex as the battle itself, a mixture of bitterness, pride, and grim respect. Many Canadian infantrymen remembered it as the rifle that betrayed them in their worst moments. Others spoke of the Ross with a kind of reluctant admiration, acknowledging its unmatched accuracy even as they cursed its fragility. But regardless of personal feelings, every soldier understood one truth. The rifle had shaped their experience of the war in ways no piece of equipment should. Veterans' letters reveal this duality. Some described jamming bolts that forced them into bayonet combat. Others recounted nights spent meticulously cleaning their rifles, knowing one clump of mud could decide life or death. Yet sniper teams wrote with almost affectionate precision about the Ross. They praised its long-range performance, calling it a rifle for calm hands and steady hearts, capable of reaching targets the Lee Enfield could not match. This conflicting legacy spread beyond the trenches. German soldiers, writing in their own accounts, expressed respect for the Canadians, not for their equipment, which they still considered inferior, but for the discipline and accuracy with which they used it. The performance at Ypres earned Canadians a reputation for stubborn resilience that followed them through the rest of the war. In later engagements, German units approached Canadian sectors with heightened caution, remembering the determination they had witnessed in 1915. Back home in Canada, the rifle became a political lesson written in steel. Newspapers debated the failure of military procurement. Soldiers' testimonies reached Parliament. The eventual withdrawal of the Ross rifle marked a turning point in Canadian military policy, emphasizing practicality over national symbolism. The decision to adopt the Lee Enfield for all infantry units became both a tactical improvement and a symbolic admission that the nation's pride project had faltered. Yet the story did not end with rejection. The Ross lived on in specialized roles, particularly in the hands of snipers who valued its remarkable precision. In these silent duels across no man's land, the rifle redeemed itself in the eyes of many. It was no longer forced into roles it could not fulfill. It was allowed to excel at the task for which it had been designed. In that narrower realm, it became deadly, dependable, and respected. As the war progressed, the Canadians' reputation continued to rise. Battles such as the Somme, Vimy Ridge, and Passchendaele solidified their status as elite assault troops within the Allied armies. But Ypres remained the emotional anchor, the moment when a young nation learned what courage could overcome and what it could not. Now, with the consequences laid bare and the human stories told, the final step is to reflect, calmly and philosophically, on what this episode reveals about war, technology, and the will of ordinary men who carried a flawed rifle into extraordinary danger. In the quiet years after the guns of Ypres fell silent, the story of the Ross rifle settled into a place far deeper than the pages of military reports. It became a reminder of the strange contradictions of war, a place where flawed tools are carried by men who refuse to be defined by them, and where national pride is tested not by symbolism, but by the weight of real battle. The Canadians who fought at Ypres did not earn their reputation because they carried the best equipment. They earned it because they carried on, even when their equipment failed them. Their endurance revealed something larger than a malfunctioning rifle. It showed how human determination can outlast even the most unforgiving circumstances. The Ross rifle did not symbolize Canadian weakness. It symbolized the trial through which Canadian strength became unmistakable. Technology shapes modern warfare, but it cannot replace the courage that fills the spaces where machines falter. At Ypres, the rifle's failures exposed the limits of engineering. Yet the men behind it revealed the limitless resolve of a young nation learning the cost of standing on the world stage. The Germans who faced them came away with a new respect. The Allies who fought beside them gained new trust. And Canada itself, still forging its identity, discovered something essential: that a country becomes a nation not through declarations or inventions, but through the conduct of its people when history presses hardest. The Ross rifle would eventually fade from the trenches, replaced by sturdier tools. But the memory of the men who carried it, who fought through gas, mud, fear, and malfunction, remains. Their stand at Ypres endures as a testament to resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet power of ordinary soldiers who accomplished the extraordinary.